Now it's time for something we've talked about, a story we've talked about for more than a year now. We covered this story back last April of 2025. This case has sparked intense debate across social media, cable news, podcasts, and countless group chats. Some people viewed it as a clear-cut murder case, and others believed that it was a legitimate claim of self-defense. And for many, race became part of the conversation almost immediately. Now, a jury has delivered its answer. 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony has been convicted of murder in the fatal stabbing of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf during a high school track meet in Frisco, Texas. Jurors rejected Anthony's self-defense claim and returned a guilty verdict after less than 3 hours of deliberation. Anthony was sitting under a team tent that belonged to Metcalf's school. Witnesses testified that Metcalf repeatedly told Anthony to leave. Again, it was raining that day, and that's why Anthony was sitting under the tent. The exchange escalated. Prosecutors argued that Anthony became the aggressor and ultimately responded to a shove by pulling a knife and stabbing Metcalf in the chest. Defense attorneys argued that Anthony feared self-harm and feared imminent harm and acted in self-defense during this chaotic moment. And the jury ultimately sided with prosecutors and sorry, um, are you there, Mr. There you go.
Yeah, all good.
Just making sure everyone's still here. Okay, back to where I left off. Sorry about that. Technical difficulty. Prosecutors argued that Anthony became the aggressor and ultimately responded to a shove by pulling a knife, stabbing Metcalf in the chest. The jury ultimately sided with prosecutors rejecting the self-defense claim. But the story didn't stay inside of the courtroom. It became something much larger. Almost immediately after the incident, social media users began framing the case through different lenses. Some focused on race, some focused on self-defense, and others focused on school safety, variety because of online discussions amplified the killing in racial terms, even though attorneys on both sides argue that race was not the reason for the confrontation itself. And that's where this story kind of becomes bigger than one verdict, because many Americans weren't simply just following this as a criminal trial. They were watching two competing narratives unfold in real time. Another issue that generated significant attention before the verdict was jury selection. Karmelo Anthony is black, Metcalf was white, and one of the most discussed aspects of the trial was that no black jurors ultimately served on the jury that decided this case. Supporters of Karmelo Anthony raised concerns about fairness and representation because of this jury pool, but prosecutors maintained that juror removals were based on reasons unrelated to race. Now, regardless of where people fall on that debate, the composition of the jury became part of the national conversation long before deliberations began. And for many observers, that discussion is likely to continue even after the verdict was read, because at the end of the day, we are Americans. So do you think this verdict settles the facts of the case, or was it over as soon as the jury was selected? What do you guys think?
I think the biggest thing to point out, though, is that the jury there was no black people on the jury, but the jury was made of Hispanics, Asians, and white people. And I think that's important to notate, because sometimes I think when you say there's no black people, you think that it's only white people. At least I do. And I did want to look that up, and I did notice that. I think what really sucks about this case, though, realistically speaking, that it is kind of cut and dry. Like it's like we put race into the conversation and school safety and all these other things, but it's really like it boils down to the fact of, was it self defense or was it like murder? And I don't think it was premeditated murder, but it was murder. Like you did kill him. I did read this thing where the jury said that, and this just depends on like a timing perspective. It like the type of I think they called it like, I forgot the name of what they called it, but basically it was like when you commit a crime without like, because you didn't get a chance to like think about it, like it just kind of happened like a spur of the moment. And what happened in that situation is that essentially you would get less time in jail. I think that obviously it was going to be a guilty verdict. I think even his lawyers assumed that it would be a guilty verdict because they were arguing that case and not even necessarily like a self defense thing. They were saying like, hey, like he reacted basically without thinking about it. And I think they're just trying to get him less time versus, like life in prison and all that kind of stuff like that. So like I I can understand why a person would be like, oh, look, this is a black boy and a white guy. Like this is a racist situation. I don't necessarily think this situation was racist. I think it was pretty cut and dry, like of how this would probably go. And like, but I do understand the frustration that people have overall.
When we first talked about this case, Ty, we did go over the fact that, he was in a tent that wasn't his. Like he wasn't supposed to be under that tent. And people asked him to leave. He didn't want to leave. Karmelo didn't want to leave. And then, the guy, Austin Metcalf, then approached him to get him to leave. And that's when he got stabbed in his chest. I don't know how much the trial details kind of impacted that timeline of events. Do you understand why they ruled this, a murder and found him guilty, or do you think it has something to do with the makeup of the jury?
I honestly don't think it had anything to do with the makeup of the jury. It really is that someone was killed in a situation where we're not, like, we're used to school bullies, right? And we have ways to deal with that situation. There's coaches and staff, and there's people around who could have dealt with that situation in a way where someone didn't have to die. I'm not saying that the young man was in the right for approaching Carmelo and doing what he did. He was likely dead wrong, but it's like, um, was his life being taken the way? Like, do we feel like that was justified? And the answer is no, we don't. But this is one of those cases where everybody loses. So if we can take all types of sides, and we can create all levels of scenarios, and we can say if the races were reversed, and it's America, so that might very much be true. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest message that I take away from this is everybody loses in these situations. This is not like, oh, like, both these young men's lives are now completely ruined and turned upside down, because the kids of this generation lack conflict resolution skills, and lack empathy, and the things that we so desperately try to teach them. And I think, if anything, we can walk away from that with this tragedy. And yeah, race is always going to be a factor in America. It's America. We'd be stupid to think race doesn't play a factor in things. We try to say that it doesn't, but it does, and that's why it turns into these race things. But if we refocus our energy, we can see, like, these kids lack emotional intelligence. These kids lack a lot, emotional regulation. Like, this should not have escalated like that, in any way, shape, or form. And I think if we were in school, even not that long ago, I don't think this would have escalated like that. Like that was a big escalation, and it's scary, um, on both sides. If you guys are in a sport, and you guys are playing the same sport, you should have some level of camaraderie. You should, like, there's a level of rivalry. Like, yeah, get away from our tent, but like, to take it to the point where it's raining, you're bullying, you're doing this thing, but then you're turning around, you're stabbing. It's like, I mean, this whole story kind of blows my mind and like really kind of worries me a little bit, to be honest with you, because I don't like the way any of this is going. Like I don't even need to touch race. There's so many other things wrong with this story, um, that and it really is a tragedy. It really does make me like, sad about how the whole thing turned out. I figured it would end like this, but it's still very, very sad loss of life on both ends, and for both families, their lives are done, are ruined forever because these two boys.
Yeah, Eric. I mean, I know Ty says that he doesn't have to take it to race, but one of the immediate reactions to this story was, the whole thing about, well, if he's not convicted, then we're going to get. It's like that. It was that type of feeling, right? There was very racial feelings and undertones to, if Karmelo's not convicted, there's going to be problems, that type of thing. Do you think, that has something to do with the ruling in this case at all?
I mean, they would definitely underline issues if they were already before the jury cast, had a verdict. They were already saying underlying issues like, if this black boy isn't convicted, there's going to be trouble. There's going to be trouble in this town, So I mean, like Ty said, 2 lives are lost in this whole incident. You hate to bring race up into it, but the people in the town were saying that if this black man is not convicted of killing this white young teen, there's going to be problems in this town. So you can't say the jury didn't hear that or didn't feel that. It wasn't like the jury was sequestered. These people have to go back to their normal lives after this trial. So I'm not going to say that wasn't in the back of their mind.
And it was a high profile story that happened over a year ago. Like, they just went into jury selection like a month ago, if even that. Like, so this is something that they all probably had known about coming into the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's like again, this is America. There's always going to be, like, especially when you have something like this where they're of 2 different races. Oh, and we're going to create our scenarios like, and if the roles were reversed, well, we've seen people get away with what we would consider murders when roles were reversed. Like, we understand how that would happen, but again, I don't know. I just don't find it beneficial if I sit around and like create a bunch of scenarios and I say a bunch of things. At the end of the day, like, these are the groups, this is the demographic that I work with every day, and so it's for me, the story hits a little bit differently. Trying to help manage this situation in my mind about what could have been done, and how what we can teach and what we can learn is for me a more helpful thing. Like, yes, race, we're in America, race is always going to be an issue. We deal with it every day, and you're never going to get away from it, but we don't have to push that narrative forward every time we get an opportunity. We really can say, like, what is happening with our kids, and why would a situation escalate like this with these young people.
And just for clarity, the sentencing phasing that I was mentioning is called sudden passion, and basically what it'll do, it could lower his sentencing from 20 to 90 years to 2 to 20 years if the judge takes that into consideration.
There's no way this kid's getting 2 years, bro. You can wipe that off the table.
Guilty. Yeah, he's probably in there for the rest of his life. Yeah. All right, moving on to some lighter news.
Right.
We've been dark for a little bit. Time to move to the scoop.
Scoop.